Good morning, goeiemorgen, Dumelang Watu. This is our 12th Nation in Conversation. What started off as a conversation amongst role players moved out to where I think it should be, and that is to be in the center of society. And of course, recent incidents spark you to think of certain things. And my thought this morning is that it's always difficult to manage an incident. That's always reactive. You have to normalize processes and normalize society. That's a much better and sustainable way to go. Some of the incidents that I've seen in the last few days tell me that there's a lot of work still to do. And it's exactly what we're trying to do with Nation in Conversation. Tackle the difficult conversations, tackle the issues, and speak to each other in a civilized and direct way to normalize what we're busy with. This morning, one of the processes that is essential to agriculture and to the whole value chain, logistics. And if it doesn't work, almost all of it doesn't work. The whole value chain doesn't work. We have very special guests in the audience today. And if I start naming you, but Ivan, you here, thank you. We see what you do in the Western Cape, you and your team. Well done. If all provinces does what you guys do there, it'll be a totally different South Africa. So well done. And Vrystaat Landbou is here. Also welcome. The chairman of Senwes is here, Dani. Well done. And then a lot of familiar faces. We have an esteemed panel. Tieu, you've outdone yourself so far this year, so that's the standard. Don't go down, go up. He's got a very good panel. Welcome. Never judge somebody, as we say in Afrikaans, moenie iemand op sy baadjie takseer nie. What you see here, you'll find very interesting what they say. Please go to our streaming platform. You have to listen to yesterday's session on the economy. You have to do it. It was enlightening, and you'll find a lot of value. Instead of sitting Saturday afternoon and doing nothing, take that hour and look at it. Very valuable information. So it's a live streaming event. Please be as quiet and passive as you can. You can't do waves here, Mexican waves, not permitted. We're going to start with a short intro video, and then Tieu will introduce and shoot. Welcome and enjoy it.
Globalization and the interconnectedness of the world economy has led to great efficiencies, but also to vulnerabilities. If one link in the chain fails, the system can be disrupted, as was seen when the Ever Given, one of the largest container ships in the world, became stuck in the Suez Canal for 6 days in March 2021. Logistics is an important part of any modern economy, and South Africa is a major exporter of several agricultural products. This highlights our exposure to neglected infrastructure. The cost of this neglect is often moved back towards producers, eating away at their margins. There are, however, initiatives between the private and public sector to improve on South Africa's current challenges.
So from an efficiency perspective, a recent study conducted by the World Bank put South Africa's port amongst the worst performing in the world. On top of that, we have roughly a fifth of the world's containers bogged down in ports around the globe. Schedule efficiency has reached an all-time low in 2022. And of course, costs have increased exponentially. If one compares Q4 in 2021, for instance, to Q4 in 2019 pre-pandemic, we're looking at an increase of 115%.
There are, of course, huge areas between the production areas and big distances from the production areas to market and towards the ports where they are exported. Because of these big distances, the UNFCCC rates that South Africa is one of the most trade-exposed countries in the world. especially when you do consider the climate impact of moving a lot of these goods by road, which is what we currently do. So there is, both for the cost competitiveness reasons, of course, a third of the price of basic staples can be attributed to transport, and at the moment predominantly road transport. There is a big drive to move certain, especially bulk agricultural commodities, from road onto rail.
We are often engaging with transit also on what is happening in our harbours, and already transit has moved to the idea of a public-private partnership, not only in terms of some of the terminals, but also in terms of some of the rail systems, and we welcome that.
Currently, the Port of Cape Town, exports the majority of our table grapes, deciduous fruits, for instance. Durban, despite the challenges that they're facing, this year with the floods, accounted for the majority of our citrus exports. Of course, in the Eastern Cape, there's wool exports as well as citrus exports, and new opportunities that the industry is also looking at exporting via Maputo, especially citrus from the Lowveld region.
So port efficiency is obviously a key short-term aspect that we need to fix, but it's also constraining to longer-term prospects. Expectations are that fruit exports, for instance, could increase by around 50% over the coming decade. So if we're to handle those volumes, we'll need significant expansion in both capacity and improvements in efficiency for our port throughput.
So these are the type of initiatives that AGBIS, in partnership with state as well as non-state actors, are trying to resolve, to get an efficient and streamlined logistics system to ensure that products get from production areas to the market, as well as reducing that time, which will of course increase the quality from the production areas through the port towards the export destinations.
This is important for us, our local economy, and it's important that we make sure that the infrastructure assists us with our food security, and also making sure that we can produce food that is affordable for everyone in the country.
Wish you welcome here. We've had great discussion so far, and I think with this panel and the topic, this discussion will be as important as any of the discussions we will have in South Africa. We sit in a position whereby we have got an agriculture sector that is growing, that is producing, but the local market is not big enough to take up that production. And therefore, it's important that we have logistical capabilities for that. So let me first introduce my panel to you. On the far side is Dr. Pieter Taljaard. He's the CEO of Grain SA. Pieter, welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
Next to him is Jan-Louis Spoelstra. He's a representative of Flying Swans Foundation. But that might not be a name that you're all familiar with. Watch this space, and I'll get to that. Next to him is Dr. Andre van der Vyver, Executive Director of the South African Cereals and Oilseeds Trade Association. Andre, welcome.
Thank you.
And next to him, right next to me, is Misumzi Kata, the Regional Operations Manager, Eastern Cape, for the Perishable Products Export Control Board. Very welcome.
Thank you, Theo.
So let me start. Andre, the magnitude of the challenge. Can you give us some perspective?
Yes, thank you, Theo. Thank you for this opportunity. I think let me start by saying that I personally believe that for any business to survive, you need to grow. And that definitely includes agriculture and the grain producers as well. And so we've seen that this has been taking place over the years. Over the last 10 years, 12 years, grain production has grown by about 9% per year. But the demand for grain products in South Africa has grown by only 2%. So that means we are producing more and more surpluses every year. And barring the odd drought year, hopefully there won't be one soon, we have to deal with this problem as such. And it's not a problem, it is an opportunity. And this opportunity, the way to get this product out is through exports. It's the only way. And in the case of the grain, most of our grain is going through Durban. And we are exporting. In the last year, we've done about almost 3 million tons of grains. And the whole grain industry is dependent on this product being removed out of South Africa. And it not only generates income, and we can get back to that, because at certain areas we can now profitably export grain on the eastern parts of the country because of the increases globally in international prices. But that grain, it goes and bounces. So sometimes it flows very well, and then we encounter these logistical problems. And these logistical problems need to be addressed regularly, every month, every year, and it's only going to get bigger because of this exports growing every year. And it does not only apply to grain, but it also will start applying to the other products like soybeans that are also increasing in production.
Peter, from your point of view, as the CEO of Grain SA, how do you see this challenge?
Yeah, definitely, Theo. And just want to link up to some of the introductions and to what Andre said. For us, very important is firstly to produce safe and affordable food for the country, for the nation. But I mean, we also need to take cognizance of the fact that we are producing in a globalized world. We need to be competitive. We need to be able to compete to other countries. And that's a huge contribution. We have seen it in the past 2 years that agriculture do play a major role. And I mean, grain is the starting point for many foods that are produced in the value chain. And as Andre said, there's many opportunities to earn foreign income. And we have seen we can't store all the grain we have. And I think the soybean is a very successful story if we look at what happened over the past few years, where we came from and what we're producing. And very soon we expect that we are going to produce some surpluses. But there's the opportunity. How do we replace imports, crucial imports? But I think the key thing is the infrastructure need to work, because in the surplus years we need to be able to export. In years of shortages, like for example in the case of wheat, we do import a significant amount of wheat every year, and that can be on the same empty lane back. The same thing, grain is a bulk industry, as we said. Very important. It's not only the rail from the farm, those gravel roads as well, very important, but also the inputs, like for example fertilizer, which is the hot topic now, but that's the single biggest expense that the grain farmer will have, but also the heaviest, the bulkiest one that he will import. And that same chain, in a sense, can bring the inputs back. We are really poor in terms of our resources for potassium as well as for nitrogen in South Africa, and well, for phosphorus. We need to be able to produce that and get it profitably on the farm. So it links to our competitiveness, and it's important that our primary agriculture production is competitive and those farmers can continue to produce on a sustainable way, profitable. And that's the key point for us. But remember, the key focus is to produce affordable food for the nation, which is safe.
Misumzi, you are on the perishable goods. Just give us some background as to where you fit into the supply chain and how do you see the challenge?
Okay. Within PPCB, as an entity of the government, we are a certification body which is responsible for certifying all the export products outside of South Africa. So basically, with the challenges currently within the growing agricultural sector, we also need to be able to have enough manpower to be able to service the industry. And also with the fact that there are challenges with the infrastructure or with the logistical problems. So you find that the time taken by our inspectors to service particular clients is becoming longer. And you don't want that, because the more time that you give you take to service a client, it also hits his pocket, with the fact that the transporters will always hit the producer or the farmer for standing time with their transport. So it also takes quite a challenge when it comes to the servicing of the industry, because you will have an inspector which is servicing another client at a specific moment and is expected to get to the other side. But once it gets there, the transport is not there, and he moves to another one, and that other client will call him once it gets there, but he can't get there at that particular time, and the truck will have to have some waiting time. So when it comes to grain, we also involved with the certification or doing the inspection within the ports before the product can be exported to any other importing country outside of our country. And with that, we also would like to see quite a lot of collaboration between ourselves and the industry, because if, as PPCB, we are not aware of how many tonnage that the industry is looking at exporting through which port, we're not going to be able to plan accordingly and to have the resources needed at the specific time when they are. So as PPCB, we always try and preach that collaboration between ourselves and the industry so that we can be able to have a smooth running a logistical or value chain within the business.
Which means everybody needs to plan according to the expected volume of exports going through the whole process. And if anywhere there's a communication problem, it's not addressed. Now, in terms of we've talked quite a bit about the Agriculture Master Plan that was signed last week, and this values chain approach played a massive role in making sure where the possible bottlenecks in the various value chains can be and who should play what role. But Jan-Louis, you have experience as in terms of your background as to the logistical possible problems, because it's clear that moving goods through this logistical value chain is critically important. Simply, we don't have the market in South Africa to take up all the produce. Those produce needs to leave our shores. What is your synopsis of what we're talking about?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And talking from my background, I worked for many years at Transnet, and I was very much involved in trying to identify what is needed for the future, how do we address. But where we are today is that the challenges are really surfacing and become very visible. What it is that we need to do is to work as an industry and the full logistical chain industry in concert, in collaboration, to start to do that plan. I very often in discussions use the term, we need to plan from farm all the way to the fork of the consumer in Europe or in America or wherever we export to. And this is to say that when we start planning for the expansion in agriculture, we need to understand what is the requirements on all the different chains, whether it's on PPECB that must assist us to do the certification. And perhaps, if I can just add that, but PPECB will do the certification also for the importing countries. It is. So
it's a role on both sides of the.
It's a role on for both sides. So PPECB will do the certification, for example, for the European Union, to say that any of the export citrus leaving the Sundays River Valley will arrive in the European Union to the quality that is expected in terms of the trade agreements with the countries. But after that, then also how do you plan all the logistical parts? Meaning, do I move the traffic by road or by train into the port? Do I have enough facilities in the ports? And do I integrate well enough with the shipping lines to ensure that we can get it through? But also, how do we pre-warn the terminals arriving or receiving the fruit in Europe, if it's the Port of Rotterdam or any of the other ports, to see that they know what's coming and that the facilities also exist in those ports for handling of the cargo. Back to South Africa, the real challenge today, and this is where we need to form what we call in the Flying Swans, the coalition of the willing, and that is how do we bring the farmers, the farming industry, government, but also the role players like a Transnet, the Port Authority, all together to say how do we plan for today, but also how do we plan for the medium term to have a much improved system going forward. Yeah.
We talked about the much improved system. Where does the organized labor, organized agriculture fit into that system?
So for us, in terms of us as an organization, Secota, we participate in various discussion forums together with other industries or together with other institutions, and we're trying to align the different challenges that there are and make different input from our different perspectives. So, like for example, the exports, there are two major sort of challenges at the moment. It's in terms of the harbour itself, but more important from our side is getting the product down to the harbour. So getting that product down to the harbour, we have regular discussions where not only the Secota exporting members are participating in, but also the storage owners, and also Grain SA is also part of that discussion. So trying to come up with some solutions and moving that product. And I think it's something that is slowly but surely working, but it's absolutely necessary, and it will have to be there in the future as well.
Pieter?
I think what's important also is from a Grain SA's perspective, yes, we focus on grains, but we also do realize that a lot of our members also are involved in other industries. And I mean, this discussion here went into perishable products and fruit and so forth. So it's crucial that we understand the bigger picture, because these infrastructure that's so crucially needed is the same infrastructure that we need for all the different products and even in other sectors of the economy that we need it. So what's key is that we work together towards that common goal. And these so-called cross-cutting issues, within organized agriculture, we support each other. So on a regular basis, the people on the introduction, we work with Agri-SA and support them on this, because for fruits, it's even more important that the turnaround times are cut down. But the same for grain. So it's key that we work on a whole system. And I mean, if you protect one port of a line or a portion of a rail line, it's not only to the benefit of grain, it's to many other products, and that's important that we work together to solve this.
Your challenge when they say working together, you're part of that value chain.
Definitely, Theo, working together, because what I see on my side is the fact that there's currently already with, if I'm correct, I might say about 70% or 60% of the export. Our agricultural industry tends to push it through to Durban port, and there's quite a lot of congestion that are there. And my question to the industry would be, why don't we look at the other opportunities which are available to the other ports? If you look at the grain industry, in the East London port terminal, there has been grain silos that have been sitting there for quite a number of years that the industry has been using, whilst they are already facing quite a lot of challenges within the Durban port. So those are the other opportunities that can be utilized by the industry so that they can also be able to improve the efficiencies that are there.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, Theo, I think very good point. In discussions that we had with Transnet together with Sakota, is when we ask about the grain silos or the opportunity in East London, the first thing was that the railway line going down via Bloemfontein through the Free State to East London is simply not accessible. You can't use it. So I mean that's the key thing for us. The opportunity to really cut down on the transport cost is a key thing. So if the railway line is not available, then it's definitely not an option. But I think that's the key thing. We need to get that in place, and that's why these conversations are so crucial.
Yeah, but that's the critical point from your point of view that can alleviate your challenges. So there's other players that might be challenging here. Jan-Louis?
Yeah, but perhaps I must just come in, and my perception on East London is that it is a very good facility.
The infrastructure at East London Port?
The port itself is not a very deep port, but the quayside depth next to the grain elevator in East London is deeper than that of Maiden Wharf, which means I can load bigger vessels out of East London. The rail line between Springfontein is where you link up going down to East London. The total capacity on that line, the capacity utilization today is less than 5%.
So 95% is not being utilized?
95% is not being utilized. There's most probably capacity for 20 trains per direction if the traction and wagons are available, and one train, if we're lucky, per day operate on that train, on that track. So the capacity exists, but this is where we need to look at what is the correct solution. Transnet is cash-strapped. They're not going to invest in the locomotives, and they cannot afford to invest in the locomotives, the wagons, and what is required. And this is back to the partnerships to say, how do we get to the future solution?
I'm going to get to that.
Can we get that up and running?
Can I just two notes that were made, and I please don't, if anybody of the press is here, don't quote these numbers. I've got no idea if it's correct or not. Is it true that there's roughly 12,000 trucks a day in the Durban port? Or is that, because somebody said that and noted that number?
No, let me just correct you there. In terms of the current exports of grain, we're doing about 350,000 tons a month, which is about 7 vessels of about 55,000 tons. And currently there's no rail going down because of the floods. So that everything is transported by road, and that translates to about 8,000 trucks a month, that is moving down to Durban. 8,000 a month that's going down for this 350,000. But that's only the grain. So of course there's all the mineral trucks and everything, and it takes a few days. Well, it doesn't take long, but a day or two to turn the truck around. So there may be quite a number of trucks, but I think that number is a bit high. But yes, I mean, in terms of going down and roads that are not built for this, at 8,000 a month, interlinks, that's a lot. That's 350 a day or something.
And I think this is very important what Andre is saying, and one of the key things that we have put in the master plan is really to look at the ways in which we can deepen that draft or the depth in the harbour, because Andre have referred to 50,000 ton vessel, but the newest one are over 80,000 tons. And how are we going to load them in the future? At this stage, there's some instances I've been told, I'm not an expert there, but that they loaded the vessel half capacity at one port, and then they have to move it to fill it up. And the interesting thing, what Andre mentioned about the trucks, is if you calculate that backwards and you just think about the congestion and the length of all these trucks, if you park them bumper to bumper, it's a 35-kilometer lane of trucks to fill one 55,000-ton vessel.
And that gives you an idea of the magnitude.
Yeah.
Jan-Louis, I'm going to get to you now. Just the question I also just want to clarify. A proper functioning train,
Yes.
goods train, how many trucks does that take off the road? Just to give a guesstimate.
If you take a typical grain train with maize or soya that can go down to the port of Durban or East London, a 50-wagon train, and theoretically Transnet can operate longer trains, but that train can take up to 4,000 tons. So that can take up to 100 trucks off the road.
So one train takes 100 trucks off the road, and you're talking about at Springfontein, they could run 20 trains, there's only one running.
Yeah, on the Springfontein to East London, the size of the trains may be limited only to 50 wagons, perhaps even a bit shorter, but it creates a lot of capacity. Perhaps just one of the things that I did is my first task in Transnet many years ago was export of maize. And that was in the 94-95 season. We exported 6.2 million tons of maize, of which 3.5 million tons went through the port of East London. It was all white maize, because that was the preferential port for white maize. White maize tends to be for human consumption. And due to the lower humidity in East London, that's the preference for human consumed grains.
East London.
East London. So yellow maize, which tends to be used for animal feed, always run through the port of Durban. You know, and this is, we must also take into consideration just some of the historical part. The capacity of the trains, they can significantly reduce the number of trucks going into the port of Durban.
I want to move the discussion slightly towards what is in the master plan, the agriculture master plan, and also what the President has noted, what the Minister of Transport has noted, the participation of the private sector in this logistical infrastructure. And now we're talking specifically about the rail and the port infrastructure. Jan-Louis, firstly, is there, what we see in the master plan and what's being talked about, is there somewhere examples where this is actually working and where we can look at the experience and say, but this can work?
Yeah, if I can start to talk about South Africa. In South Africa, we were successful before to concession some of the branch lines, very much focused on agriculture. And one that I can use as an example is in Ceres in the Western Cape, where a line that was closed for nearly 20 years were opened by Transnet together with Ceres Rail Company, and with the assistance of the Western Cape government, a lot of push at the time to say, let's make it work. And you really find that some of the export apples and pears out of that specific valley enters the port directly by train. So that's just one example. There's 2 more concessions. Transnet recently went out to advertise 6 more concessions. We're waiting just to get the feedback on how many of them would have been successful. But that's inside South Africa on the rail side. On one of the other parts in the master plan and in the rail master plan especially is the private ownership of wagons. And you find that some big clients already started investing in their own railway wagons as a start in South Africa. And I'm sure that they won't there won't be a problem if I use that as an example, but Sasol, with all the chemicals that is moved from Secunda down to the port of Richards Bay, all those wagons is owned by Sasol. None of that is owned by Transnet. And from the time that Transnet initially sold the wagons, about 14 years ago to Sasol up to today, the total fleet doubled in size. Sasol doubled the fleet. If it was left to Transnet, that would have remained as is. On the fertilizer, which connects back to the agricultural space, you find that Omnia also owns a fleet of wagons that Transnet allows them. And Transnet then offer, for now, a different kind of service. So that's in South Africa. If you look at South America, I was fortunate to represent Transnet for many years in the Brazilian economy. You find that when the private sector took over the control of the railways, traffic, especially in the south in Brazil, where I was involved in a company called ALL, America Latina Logistica, the volume of grain on rail increased from 3.5 million tons a year to last year about 250 million tons of grain a year.
So that's a factor of 3 to 200. That's a massive increase.
It's a massive increase. It actually propelled that southern part of Brazil to become the biggest exporter of grain on water, especially into the Atlantic Ocean. And I think they may already export more than the United States, just in terms of that. But the unlocking of agriculture was made possible because of the private sector through the banks and big financial institutions that started investing.
I just want to quickly add there that we should remember there are 3 export terminals in Durban for the grain.
Yeah.
And 2 of them are under lease by a company called South African Bulk Terminals, SABT, which is owned by Bidvest. And they have a 25-year lease on those 2 terminals. And then the 3rd terminal is managed by the TPT, Transnet Port Terminals. And just very recently, there were also negotiations for an agribusiness company to take over that lease, but that hasn't materialized. But so there are sometimes ongoing discussions about this. But those 2 terminals are the 2 top terminals at the moment and are handling most of the exports, and that is actually in private sector hands on long-term lease. The East London one is also managed by TPT, Transnet Port Terminals.
So, too, I think it's important to look at, when we look over the last 20 years, just to put that number into perspective. We went from 80% 20 years back of the grain being transported by rail. We are now down in the past 20 years to, I think it's 17 or 18%.
I think it's even lower.
Even lower of the grain on that. So that just complicates it. But I think to what Jan said, there's many opportunities that we can utilize in the future of these concessions. That's in dire need, and not only talking to exports, but also improving the logistics of the value chain. For example, if we think about our double cropping areas, the irrigation area, if you think down the Orange River, think about the area north of Brits, the Hartbeespoort Dam area, there's definitely areas where the storage capacity is not enough. And if you can have a small piece of line on the concession, it will help significantly, because also it's quite congested into these areas to bring the grain out. And going back to the fertilizer, the same one down from Phalaborwa to Richards Bay, where Phoscot produces the phosphate or the MAP. It's a key thing that those lines operate to bring down the cost. And those are the opportunities. Another one that I can think about, if we talk about East London, in the master plan, if you look at opportunities in the future, where the future grain may come or expansion come from, is really the Eastern Cape, specifically those areas where developing farmers are struggling with market access and silos. And I think that's very close. So if we put this together in the master plan, and the master plan is not something new. 50 years ago, the government already started with master plans and working on that. But that's the point that we need to take. And what you said is planning forward where the new production will come from and how do we plan to export this, because that's what we really want to do. We want to become part of the global food basket and export our produce.
Msumzi, your view on the master plan and how it relates to your role in terms of quality control. That's the one point. The other point is the private sector involvement. How do you view that?
Look, it's quite difficult because you must also remember as a state entity, if you look at the public-private ownership, the government is also going to be of the view to say, yes, we want to have partners with the private sector, but also we have to also look at the red tapes because there might be some issues within that partnership that might also be used as a barrier of entry from the developing farmers. So you also don't want to push that public-private partnership to be used as a barrier. So once it starts or is being formulated, there should be some proper guidelines to say, are we going to be able to open access for upcoming BE farmers, if I might put like that, because that's where the government is going. They also look after the BE farmers. And if you look at the quality side of things, currently the issue is to try and do the quality certification at the point of production. But there has been a growing trend now where you've got quite a lot of producers and pack houses moving towards the port. I think that also is being informed by the fact that there's quite a lot of challenges with the movement of trucks towards the port, and quite a lot of people now feels that if I'm closer to the port, there could be quite a lot of efficiencies for me to move my produce. And also you look at the fact that within the South African space over the past 2-3 years now, we have already been faced with the challenge of containers. And it's another thing that we also, on our side as PPCB, we encourage our growers that move away from the containers. You also need to try now and move back to the bulk vessel. Yes, I know already the grain SA is already on the bulk vessel, not on the containers, but on the other commodities, we need to move back into the special reefer vessels instead of the containers, because we always face with the challenge of shortage of containers year in, year out.
Yeah. And that is a bottleneck that has the whole logistical chain under pressure.
Yeah, perhaps I just need to make a point on that, and that is that we need to take note of what's happening in Europe, especially on the receiving clients. If you look at a lot of the terminals in the port of Rotterdam, the old bulk vessel kind of terminals were on the city side of the port of Rotterdam, were very high valuable property. And the movement is to move the whole agricultural base in the port of Rotterdam into the Maasvlakte, which is the new development area, and that is all focused on reefer containers. So even one of the last big entities that used to receive bulk terminals in the Westerland side will be moving out on that facility. So the bulk reefer vessels, which was part of 50 years ago's models for the movement of that kind of fresh produce, that changed. 95% of all the fruit is now exported in reefers, and we think that within the next 10 years it will be 100%. So when we start planning, we need to plan for what is required
on the receiving end.
On the receiving end, but the South African infrastructure must mirror what is required in the European space. Just on that as well, you find that optimization in terms of logistics in Europe means that a lot of the fruit that is coming from South Africa will go into a facility called the Koelpoort Rotterdam. The reefer will be unpacked, and then it will be packed into a domestic or European-only container, not one that will go onto the water. Why do they do that? Instead of 20 pallets into a container, they can go to 28 pallets in one container, and it reduces the cost per pallet on land-based transportation. So for the movement from Rotterdam into Switzerland, you find that it is not the reefer container that left the Sundays River that ends up in Switzerland, but it will be a repacked container. And part of what we need to just look at in South Africa is for the grain, for the fruit, what is the best optimized solution that we need to find?
I assume not only is the logistical problem, but the more you have to unpack and repack, the more you add to cost and time and quality.
You add cost and time and quality, but if your saving on the land-based transportation is significant, you can afford to do that, and you can do that within the quality control required.
I do share your same sentiments, but the biggest challenge within South Africa is to, for example, you will look at a particular season where you move quite a lot of containers out, and there's always a challenge of getting those containers back. Yes. And how do you engage other businesses? Most probably, I think it might also be saying it could also be a discussion within the business unit within South Africa to say,
how do you manage?
Yes, or even try to talk to guys like Edco and say, instead of using your normal containers, maybe now when you import, you can start utilizing your reefer containers so that we can have containers that are available on this side.
Less logistical.
Yes, because our challenge now is quite to get those containers this side of the...
I think what we need to do here is also distinguish between the short-term problems and the longer-term problems, because certainly from a longer-term perspective, we all look forward, and that requires a lot of planning and capital investment. Peter referred to the terminals at Durban previously, where it's correct what he said, that the vessel is loaded because of that draft that the ships have in two of the three terminals. They load the vessel actually halfway or more than halfway, 40,000 tons, and they move it over to the third terminal to top it up, as we say. So that draft is to be deepened, and that is millions and millions of investment to fix that, if it can be done, or build a new terminal, because we definitely need the bigger vessels for competitive exports. But then you have the short-term problems that we have, like the moving the product down to the port, and the cable theft that we experience with TFR, Transnet Freight Rail. And that's a short-term problem that needs to be addressed now, but it's equally important. So I think we just take that into account.
I want to move to solutions. The solution is clearly the short-term needs to be managed, but you cannot build a sustainable business on crisis managing the short-term. You have to have longer-term focus in the longer term. And if you just look at what BFAB's projection is in terms of the growth of the area under irrigation and the more capacity that's being continuously created, as you talked about grain, but that goes for fruit and all other sectors. As we grow the sector, the problem with growing the sector is if you cannot get that goods out of the country, it's going to move all the way into the current market, and our market's not big enough. The South African market cannot accommodate the growth in the agriculture sector. My question, therefore, is a lot is being made about public-private partnerships and having access to the capital in the private sector, creating private sector investment opportunities with the current infrastructure role of the government. I'm going to start, Jan-Louis. You moved on both sides of these equation.
Yeah.
In terms of opportunities for investment and collaboration between the public sector and the private sector, give us an idea of where the opportunities might lie and what you're experiencing.
Yeah. You ask a very big question, because the number of opportunities for now is so huge, and there's so many. But if I can start is, Transnet already issued a few tenders. If you think about the container terminals, the container terminal in Kugas, as well as the half of the container terminal in Durban, the expression of interest already went out to make that private. There was also the request for the sale of slots, and that is for additional trains down to Durban and from Durban to Johannesburg, as well as to East London. People sometimes don't talk about that, but it was 6 trains per direction to Durban, and more than that to East London. That's available for the private sector.
Coming back to your point of utilising East London.
Yes. It's exactly that. And it is connected as well to the view in Transnet to say that in serving the agricultural segment in Transnet, private sector involvement in rail operations, ownership of wagons, as well as in the operation and building of terminals are crucial. And that partnership between Transnet and the private sector is what is required. What is also there, and I think you will see that also coming out, if I can recall correctly what was planned, is to say that more of the branch line concessions may come out. We're sitting here in what is called in Transnet the Kroonstad cluster, which is one of the most significant production areas of grain and potentially grain on rail, as well as for the export side. And we really hope that this cluster, as well as some of those lines going into the irrigation schemes, like into Douglas or on the Atlanta line from Brits, can also be put out into concessions.
Peter,
so those are the kind of opportunities that exist.
Peter, Andre, are you seeing there's a change in the optimism in terms of the logistic chain?
Yes, yes and no. So I attended that marketing session with the slots that Jan-Louis was referring to. I'm still concerned about the red tape, because there's a lot of red tape or restrictions based on that slots that they put out. None of them were specifically for these popular grain branch lines going down to Durban, but I guess they will come. But still, the restrictions are numerous, and I think we will have to open it up and in discussion with the private sector to see, because as it is now, it'll be a bit of a challenge. But I think definitely that is the way for the future, is that collaboration, some type of private PPP. That's the only way to go.
With emphasis on not neglecting creating opportunities for newcomers and additional farmers coming into the system, because quite frankly, that is part of the future, is to make sure that there's a broader participation, and logistics trains need to accommodate that.
Yeah, I can quickly mention, I thought it's a little bit of a silver lining to the dark cloud, is that because of the problems in Durban and the surplus of grain this year, in the last few months, Sukota started with its members to negotiate with the East London port to reopen that port for grain exports, and we've actually managed now. There will be vessels going out. 2 vessels are booked coming up soon, and that'll be the first yellow maize going out through East London port since about 10 years' time. The last was white maize, but the unfortunate thing is it'll be by road. It'll not be by rail.
But currently by road. It seems there is plans in the pipeline.
Perhaps just to make a comment, and I think that Transnet did issue the tenders for the sale of slots. Many mistakes were made. There were very stringent requirements that Transnet put on the sale of slots, and the feedback is given from all the different industry to Transnet and the minister to say, rethink, rework, and go out again. So you may find that the whole system will change before the end of the year on the sale of slots, that it's not for a 2-year period, but it's for a longer time, and that the whole process, like what you find in Europe and in Brazil now, or in the 2 parts in Australia that we're competing with grain, where the access for private operators are there. But what is also important, and I just want to make that point, is we need the investment in railway wagons that is fit for purpose and efficient for today. Some of the people sitting in the audience may have heard me saying that before, but a typical FZ wagon, and if you go to some of the places here, you will see them. The design was done in 1923. It's still operating, the same basic design on the railways in Transnet today. But it means that the efficiency that was designed into that wagon that determined the operating cost on rail came from 1923, where everything was on rail and everything was steam-hauled. What we can do today is to get a much higher capacity wagon, much lower empty weight, and through that you get much more efficiency and lower cost for the transportation. And this is where the private sector and even private sector builders of wagons, there's a company building some of these wagons sitting here in Welkom. Private sector, not Transnet. They're exporting these wagons into Malawi and into Mozambique and leasing it out there. But that kind of wagons will be required to get that service down to East London working.
I'm going to ask you one question, a quick question, then I'm going to allow questions from the audience. The Transnet rail infrastructure.
Yeah.
We've heard a lot of comments on the Transnet rail infrastructure. For goods, and I'm not talking about moving people, that's not this discussion, but for goods, how would you rate the quality of the infrastructure? Because if you're going to talk about private ownership of wagons, and that's one thing, but they run on an infrastructure that Transnet maintains.
Yes.
What is the quality of that infrastructure? Because you cannot lift up the utilization of that, create public-private partnerships, additional wagons. It might be great technology-wise, the wagons, but it relies on the infrastructure.
Yes.
Your view on the quality of that infrastructure?
Yeah, perhaps just to respond to that, the quality of the infrastructure, if you first look just at the formation and the physical rails, relatively good. You know, not the best in all the lines. If you think about the main line down to Durban, perhaps on a B level, where A will be the Richards Bay and the Sitchin Saldanha line. If you look at the line to Port Elizabeth, most probably very close to a A, down to East London, a B. Some of the branch lines are sitting between a C and a B, but still safe for operations. The part that is being challenged now is because of all the theft, and that's the overhead electrical equipment as well as the signaling system, because the mining for copper by the syndicates that's stealing is really targeting all of that kind of equipment. And this is now where we also just need to ask ourselves what is required in the future. Do we need that or not?
But it's not a situation where the lines cannot be utilized if you start to get the process going, create more capital, make it more profitable. Those lines are sufficient to be utilized in a bigger way in terms of more wagons.
Yes, I think just one of the challenges from the Transnet side is that Transnet tried to do everything. Yep. They invested in the track, in the equipment, but also the locomotives, the wagons and the terminals. And this meant that they always try to sub-optimize. The minute that you can get the private sector to take a portion of that, the focus will be on the physical infrastructure and the maintenance of that.
Just want to add, there's a third component, we shouldn't forget the locomotives. That is a big challenge. Now you have the wagons, the infrastructure, but the locomotives, they are not up to standard, there are not enough of them, there are not enough drivers that are qualified, and so forth. But that is almost like another discussion.
But this all, if I listen to this discussion, it creates the ideal platform for public-private partnerships.
Yes.
Because the goods are there, the demand is there, the infrastructure is there. So it creates a playing field where you should be able to ramp up and have specific roles for specific players. But any questions? We've got about 10 minutes left. Is there any questions? And then I'm going to go to some closing remarks. Francois.
You touched on it, but maybe Jan-Louis can just give us perspective. How did we end up with locomotives, the composition of locomotives that we have now, electrical, and is that the solution for future?
Thank you. Any other questions? Thanks, Francois. Any other? Yes. Yeah. So, Jan-Louis, the locomotive question.
Yeah.
Yes, the discussion went mainly on the main roads, the ports and the railways. But the biggest challenge for the farmers is to get those grain from the farm to the silos. And at this stage, it's a very, very big challenge, especially in the Free State.
Francois, I'm going to ask you to assist with that answer. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes, there's a question at the back.
Okay, hi. Can we please try and get the Minister to Nasi in Gesprek, Nation in Conversation next year, please?
Thank you very much. I must say it was great to have the Minister of Agriculture here the day before yesterday, but I take your point. And I think we would certainly, I think this is the quality of these discussions and the way forward. And I have to, and this is now again a point, I think there's been my synopsis of Nation in Conversation discussion was 5, 6, 7 years ago. It was about us and them. And there was almost a distrust, absolute distrust between government and the private sector and investors. That has changed to, guys, we're all in this together. So thank you for the comment. I think we are moving closer where we can get that kind of participation. Thank you. Francois, can I ask you to elaborate on the question here? Because you as Senwes you've got a vested interest in making sure that the farmer gets the goods to the agriculture company's infrastructure. Your solution, how do you guys approach that?
Oh.
Yeah.
Let's try again. The first thing is that, any South African, irrespective of where you are and which industry you are, the roads, bridges, tunnels, that is a huge problem in South Africa. And I think there's one school that says, well, we pay our taxes, and therefore it's somebody else's responsibility. But the problem that we're faced with is exactly what Francois has referred to. You have to now get the grain from the farm to the silo. So, the blame game is not going to work. It's not going to shift anything. What we do is we physically bought graders, we man them, we come together with farmers, they give us diesel, we operate it, and we physically do the roads so that we just alleviate the immediate problem. But that's something that I referred to this morning. That's reactive, and it's an incident. We're trying to manage the incident. This is not a long-term solution. So I think the whole debate, and it's not only about infrastructure, you can touch almost every aspect of our economy. The problem is things aren't working, and we have to, in some way, through partnerships and social compacts, get South Africa to work again. That's the bigger issue.
Thank you very much. And I think what you're saying there in terms of that is it is a major problem, and unfortunately the rains didn't assist that. We had very bad rains in the last season, and unfortunately if you just drive around, it is a challenge. But thank you, Francois. I think the approach of taking, in the short term, fixing that does play a major role. I don't know if you want to add something to that, Peter.
I think, and I know our time is limited, but I think the key thing is, I want to bring it back to the role of the state, and that's providing an enabling environment and putting the system in place that the people of this country can do business and can work and can cherish. So I think the key thing sometimes when we, in our daily workings, it feels like the places where the state need to focus and need to do their job in terms of these roads in the rural areas, like gravel roads and secondary and tertiary roads, that's so crucial, that is supposed to be managed by and obtained and maintained by the state, is not done. Think about safety and security, those things that we require from the state. They don't focus. But in terms of the quality assurance that we spoke about earlier, then on the other hand, the state want to interfere there where the private sector and the industry has already been for many years, have been supplying a safe and secure environment, and then we need to focus and takes our attention away from where we need to focus, because now we need to sit with a situation where the state want to enforce monitoring the quality on grain, which is absolutely not necessary, because we do have high quality. And I think that's the key thing, taking back the state to the main goal, and that's in providing that enabling environment.
Jan-Louis, the question about the locomotives.
Yeah, and I think the question is, how did we get to where we are? Perhaps just a general remark first, and that is, if you look at railways around the world, you get three kinds of railways. Those that never electrified, those that are electrifying, and those that are de-electrifying. What is interesting is those that are electrifying are all state-owned, focusing on passenger traffic.
So primary passenger traffic on electric.
Passenger traffic. If you look at those that never electrified, they were always private, typically your North American and kind of railways. Those that de-electrify used to be state-owned and they were privatized, like the Mexican railways. Why is this happening? When I need to invest in a locomotive, it's cheaper just to buy diesels because I get a better time utilization on my locomotives. I don't need the diesel at the silos initially and again a diesel at Durban to move the cargo into the ports and only use the electric locomotive on the main line. I can use it straight through from the silo to the silo. And that's the reason why people did that. In South Africa, we electrified initially to get rid of coal. It wasn't coal to diesel to electric, it was coal to electric. Diesel came later. And we have two tunnels in South Africa where electric is required. That's the Sadara tunnel going down to Durban and the X River tunnel. Because of the length and the constrained design, we need to run electrics. When Transnet renewed the locomotive fleet, they focused too much on electric locomotives, in my opinion, and then the connection with state capture meant that a lot of the contracts are now being challenged in court, and that means that the availability of spare parts, especially from China's south or CSSR, means that those locomotives, the majority of that were procured, is standing and is not being used. So the amount of locomotives or the number of locomotives available for Transnet is severely constrained. But this is short term. I'm sure that it will be resolved. But the minute that the private sector comes in, the investment in locomotives is very much connected to that. I assisted one or two of the entities looking at getting involved just to give a high level calculation on if I need to run 6 trains a day on the Durban corridor, what is my investment going to be? And the majority of that is going to be in locomotives. And there will be a 2 to 3 year period when these companies need to order the locomotives and it be delivered. We just need to find the solution. Do we then hook an electric locomotive on just to go through the Sadara tunnel and uncouple it? But this is what's going to happen. But just understand, and I hope that answers the question. Yeah. You know, it's a short-term challenge.
I'm going to end off this discussion by asking the same question to everybody. You've heard where we are now, the challenges, but also the fact that it seems there's massive momentum behind trying to find solutions for this. And I'm going to ask the question in terms of, in the next 3 to 5 years, how do you see this play out? And how do you see us making this work? Or is there going to be still massive challenges? I'm going to start on my left.
Look, on my side, I see that, yes, there will be growth on the public-private partnership going forward. And it just needs to be managed properly and have
within a framework.
Within a framework, and I see it working. And we do need that fund because yes, at sometimes as the government there might be some funding constraints somewhere, which the private sector does have those funds readily available, which they can be able to invest into the public-private partnership. So that could be the way to go in the next 3 to 5 years.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think there is hope. I think this crisis, specifically in this case that I want to mention, the cable theft, has forced us to work together. We, Sukota members, and together with Grain SA and the storage operators, in that one stretch from Bethlehem to Harrismith, where we experienced these problems, and the Transnet Freight Rail said that they cannot deal with it. We now initiated a pilot project where we're going to install security cameras on this line in collaboration with a Bethlehem Farmer Control Center, which Grain SA set up. And if this is successful, you know, the bigger thing is that it'll branch out. There will be bigger collaboration between private sector, between Grain SA farmers, and between the state or TFR and so forth.
Great, but that's what I was referring to, and you elaborated. The conversation has changed. It's now collaboration to find solutions, not us and them anymore. It's collaboration. Jan-Louis?
Yeah, I think within 3 years you will see a lot changing from where we are today, a lot more participation by the private sector already in terms of capacity and operations. We're still going to have problems in 3 years. Why? In 3 years, the total amount of citrus that we're going to export will be 30% more than today. We will export most probably 1 million to 1.5 million tons of grain continuously by then, just because of the growth that's coming. So there's additional demand that's coming up, but it means that we need to start working quicker. It will improve. Transnet will start to play less and less of a role in terms of operations in the terminals as well as on the rail. But collaboration will be required to start today.
Theo, and I think it's there. What Francois referred to is doing this your own thing. And I mean, this is what Grain SA was built on, farmers starting their own thing and putting their hand in their own pocket. And we are working together. There's many examples. But again, at this stage, the current regulation doesn't allow a farmer or private institution to really work on these gravel roads, for example. So that's, again, something that we need to get clarity from the state, because whose responsibility, who's liable if there's an accident accident in the future, and that's what's typically the problem with that. So, as I said, there's many examples where we work together. Farmers are always hopeful, they're willing to invest, and I mean the conversation we had, they want to invest locally. So we need to just provide that opportunity, and I mean what we have spoken today about making the sector more profitable and more opportunities is also very important for your smaller scale farmer, for new developing farmers. So this system needs to be in place. Otherwise, those farmers will not be able to produce profitably. And if they're not profitable, there's no way that they can remain sustainable. So that's the key thing. It's good for all farmers, and that's why we need this.
Pieter, Jan-Louis, Misumzi, Andre, thank you very much. I think it was a brilliant discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Let's give a hand to the panel. Thank you.